in Nighthawks, you have this modern Art Deco style building, this wedge cutting through the night street, almost pushing behind it a building that looks very much like what you see in Early Sunday Morning. And I just can't believe Hopper wasn't thinking of this when he painted Nighthawks, which was painted over 10 years later in 1942. But I really do think they're conceptually related, and I think that was, Hopper's someone who tended to paint similar things over and over again, and we can argue this kind of pendant thing in other works in his career, although they don't match up in terms of the size. So I started researching and thinking about Nighthawks as well as part of the photographic research, and it's funny to me that not many people have talked about the Flatiron Building as being a likely inspiration for Nighthawks, but it has to be. It's because it's almost exactly the same. It's a wedge-shaped glass space that juts out in an angle, and it's obviously a very prominent building that was built in 1905, or it was. There's a picture of it here in 1905. Steichen made an iconic photograph of it. Obviously, Hopper would have walked by it many times and known about it. And in fact, there was a cigar store, as you can see here. This says cigars. That was in this space, at least at one time. And this is a Phillies cigar advertisement in Nighthawks. So to me, that sort of is that suggests that certainly Hopper was inspired by that. But Hopper also said that the Nighthawks was inspired by a building on Greenwich Avenue, which is this street. Here's a map of that. That street that cuts across the regular New York grid in the West Village, what's known as the West Village now. And there's these three corners on Greenwich Avenue that come together in these sort of wedge shapes that I looked for photographs of and found. So here, for example, is Greenwich Avenue and 11th Street. And you can see that there was, this is still there, and this is a florist, or it was when I lived in New York a few years ago. I don't know if it's still a florist. I believe you can see it's got a cigarette ad. And you can see it was a dry cleaning place at one point, but it's a glass-shaped wedge that comes to a point. And then the next corner has this, which is right next to the Sheridan Theater, which is something that Hopper also painted. And Hopper, we know that Hopper walked this street regularly because there was a branch of the New York Public Library that was at the end of the street. And this would have been like a, 15-minute walk from his house, something like that. I lived in this neighborhood when I lived in New York, so I walked this street many times. And certainly thought about it a lot when I was working on Edward Hopper. And so I was kind of amazed to find this photograph that says Crawford Lunch. This must be the restaurant he was referring to, even though it doesn't quite look like, it's not the modern, sleek style of architecture that we see in Nighthawks, but it is a wedge-shaped eating establishment, diner, perhaps, if you will. And you can see there's a very Hopper-like looking figure with a fedora, I guess that's what you call that, on, silhouetted. And you can see that it's the type of building where you can see through to the other side as you can in Nighthawks. So for me, this is the building, the building many people have tried to find that is related directly to Nighthawks, although it doesn't exist anymore. And of course, Hopper was changed. He never painted, as I said earlier, he started in reality, but he changed things. And you can't, it's almost not, it's not really the point to try and find, what Hopper was looking at for Nighthawks. It's an amalgamation of different things. He synthesized, in other words, is what I'm trying to say. But I love showing this photograph here, thinking, remember this hat, this guy in a hat here, and looking at these drawings to see these men who were dressed typical of the time. So these are the starting drawings for Nighthawks. They're small sketchbook pages. And we'll see later that the drawings for New York Movie are also, the starting drawings for New York Movie are also on these sketchbook pages. But so Hopper would start, but he started out by going out in the world and drawing from life. So he's literally sitting there, perhaps in Crawford Lunch, drawing figures that he saw and trying to develop his ideas for this painting. And you can see how specific he gets. He's drawing like a cruet and he puts notation of silver here. I guess this is maybe holds milk. I'm not sure. This looks like a salt or pepper shaker. So he's doing these very sort of small details, as well as a much more generalized view of the back of this figure that's dressed much like some of the figures in Nighthawks. And then we get to this series of compositional studies that Hopper made for Nighthawks. So he starts with these little life drawings, and then he does these compositional studies, which are fascinating. This is maybe, I'm not totally sure the order. You could argue that he would have started with the least finished sheet and goes to the most finished, which is this drawing in the Whitney's collection. These are in the Whitney's collection. These two are in a private collection, or they used to be. Hopefully, maybe they're, hopefully whoever's, if the person who owns these is watching this, please donate these drawings to the Whitney Museum, because that's where they belong. Anyway, that's my plug. This sheet's fascinating to me because you can count the number of strokes, and I think I counted like 42 or 53 or something like that. I can't remember, but it's not that many. And with that number of strokes, he gets sort of the basic composition of the painting there. You get sort of the spatial ideas are pretty much all there. You can see that it's these are graphite framing lines that I assume he put down first, so he'd sort of decided on the proportions of the painting by this point. I think this drawing is fascinating. It's kind of in some ways oppositional to this one. I always wonder if this is when he decided to make Nighthawks a night scene, because it's like he's crossing out the sky to make it, if that wasn't there, this might feel more like a daytime scene. So I find that fascinating. And here you can see the rudiments of developing the composition with the bare, really squiggly, undefined lines indicating what becomes the couple here, the soda jerk bending over here, the man with his back to us here. And it's almost like a camera coming into focus as you go from these much more spare studies to these two small drawings here to the final finished study. Finished, it's not, I mean, the final finished is the right word, because it's still, Hopper changed further things in the painting. But it is pretty close to the painting. But what's fascinating is it has lunch written here on this window, which we saw that was in that restaurant that I argue was one of the things that inspired it. But it's not in the final painting. But I mean, that to me is a link to that place on Greenwich Avenue that likely inspired him. This drawing shows you that this is that restaurant. You can see there's a lunch sign. And this shows you the kind of buildings that were behind it at the time, and this sort of stoop here, which also evokes the kind of spot on Greenwich Avenue, I'm saying. And then we get to sort of the figure studies, or the more, so after Hopper had sort of decided, the final drawings for Nighthawks, after Hopper sort of decided on the poses, decided on the composition, he was making these more detailed, nuanced tonal figure studies. This is his wife, Jo, who posed for him after they got married. You can recognize her features if you know what she looks like in this drawing for sure. You can see there's the hand holding the cigarette that ends up in the painting. And then this is probably Hopper posing for himself in a mirror, probably using this mirror here that we see in this photograph, and using a double mirror so he could see himself from behind and drawing himself that way. So these were helping him get to the final composition of Nighthawks when he painted it. And then I think it's really instructive to consider what he did change, because Hopper, I said earlier, he found it difficult to paint, and he would change things in paintings. He didn't slavishly follow his drawings. I think it's interesting. I think now in this slide you can see what looks to me like soda. So this is lunch. It's just interesting. Looks like an S and an O here. You can see he left that out in the painting because it would have been probably distracting, but it was there in the drawing. I think the most telling thing that he changed from the drawing to the painting, though, is the sort of spectator's point of view, or the point of view of the person looking in on these folks in this diner. And what I'm talking about is, if you notice in this drawing, you're a little bit lower down, and so when you see the tops of the stools here, they're a little bit more straight onto your eye, whereas in the painting, you can actually see the tops of the stools here, so you're slightly elevated above, looking more down onto the scene in the diner, and you can see the counter of the diner itself you can see the surface of it continuously, that the figures are seated at. And you don't really see that here. You don't see the surface of it here. Again, you're like the stools, you're looking at it more head on. So he really adjusts the point of view, which is really important in Hopper because, of course, he's famous for his making voyeurism a kind of subject, making urban voyeurism a kind of subject. And so tweaking that was really significant to him. And clearly the drawings were part of a process to get to the painting. And then once he sees the actual painting, he's working on it, he makes these further tweaks. So I just find all that fascinating. And then finally, one interesting thing about Nighthawks is Hopper is famous for his ambiguity. And many people have wondered what this woman in this painting is holding. And it's green. It's a green object. Some people have said it was a sandwich or a wad of cash. It could be both of those things. In some ways, what's great about Hopper is that he's generous to the viewer. I think people love to try and guess what's going on in his painting because they do have a sort of air of unresolved about them. And so in that sense, they let the viewer kind of complete it. And I think Hopper would have been fine with that. But I was fascinated to find this ad for Lucky Strike cigarettes that Hopper probably could have seen. You see, here's a picture of him in his studio later in life, but you can see that there were, this is the printing press that he used to print his prints and hang his hat on sometimes. But you can see that these magazines were lying around him with his easel, so he could have easily seen this magazine while he was painting Nighthawks. Who knows? I don't know, but this magazine is from around the time. I can't remember the exact date of it, but it's in one of the essays I wrote. But you know, this woman holding could easily be holding a pack of cigarettes, and she seems to be holding a pack of cigarettes in this drawing. And it's interesting to me that he conflates sort of the hand of the man and the woman here. And here you're wondering if he was thinking of the woman holding the cigarette, and he changed it up to make it quite a different thing in the painting.